So thanks again for joining us today. Like I said, my name is Travis Jones. We haven't met before. I'm one of the AEs at MLC CAD Systems. I've been with MLC for a little over 6 years now. And I'm sure I've spoken to quite a few of you guys and see some familiar names on the attendees list here. But basically, I worked out of our Austin, Texas office for about 5 years or so, first 5 years at MLC. And then about a year ago, I moved up to our Dallas office. I'm actually from the DFW area, so I moved back home, and I've been working up here ever since. So kind of the area that I specialize in, aside from supporting all of our SOLIDWORKS products, is I specialize in data management with PDM and automation with DRIVEWORKS. And so our goal today is to kind of show you guys really how you can optimize your workflow, your design process, to just make that whole process more efficient and potentially automate some of the steps that you're currently doing manually. So there's really kind of two main things to think about when it comes to making a process more efficient. Kind of what can I do to optimize my individual process, the things that really just affect me, and then what are the things that we can do to optimize the way that I collaborate on my design process within my organization. So it's kind of a, help me help you type scenario. If I can do my job a little bit better, then I can also help everybody else do their job better as well. So the first thing I want to talk about, these are just some really simple things that hopefully everybody's kind of taking advantage of. Most of you guys are probably fully aware of all of this, but this is really the place that you should start. And if you're not taking advantage of some of these items, then that's where I would focus your efforts first. So the first thing is just something like optimizing your file templates. So think about starting a new file, whether it's a part of an assembly or drawing. And if you have to start that new file every time and make changes to your system options, your settings, document properties, you're changing your system of units, the number of decimal places, the dimensioning standard. Those are all things that should be standardized. It doesn't take long to change them, but it all adds up. So you really want to standardize those templates and then share them with everybody in the organization so that you're all taking advantage of that consistency and everybody saving a little bit of time. Same thing with shared libraries. So if you're using Toolbox, if you're using Weldment, that shared library, if you're customizing any of that data, it needs to be accessible for everybody. If you take the time to customize some Toolbox components, you take the time to go in and customize some Weldment profiles, make those changes available to everybody so that everybody sees that same level of optimization, and we're all working with kind of the most effective data set. And the last one is training and education. Furthering your training and education on SOLIDWORKS, whether it's going to YouTube and just checking out some cool videos on new features, whether it's my.solidworks, or whether it's taking some of our training classes, there's always new features and functionalities and different ways that people are discovering to accomplish their tasks that you can hopefully take advantage of. So those are just some things for you to kind of consider to start off. But really what we want to focus on is working efficiently as a group. So as organizations grow, as more people come into the picture, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, right? You're no longer relying on yourself. Everybody's relying on one another, and being able to communicate and kind of move your designs through their workflow can become a challenge. And so we really want to show you how to tackle some of the most common hurdles that a lot of companies face and things that we've seen throughout our PDM implementations over the years. So approvals are always kind of a big one. The ability to basically take a file that somebody's worked on, submit it for approval, approve it, and communicate all the steps along the way. So make that just a seamless transition from work in progress to pending approval to approved for manufacturing. Design changes are also another common hurdle. So the ability to take an existing file and go in and make changes to it and make changes effectively so that everybody knows what's going to be affected by those changes, when the changes are taking place, who's currently working on them. Consistency is probably a big one that I see a lot. So when organizations start to get large and potentially users become disconnected, everybody starts to kind of shoot from the hip. It's a little bit of a Wild West scenario where everyone wants to do their own thing. And you can start to see different naming conventions and folder structures, and it just makes for messy data. And it makes it a little bit difficult for everybody within the organization to effectively find the data that they're looking for. And along with that, just kind of comes down to data visibility. So are we making the data necessary for our design process visible to everybody who needs to see it? Is it easy to find? Is it easy to use? How do we go about making all that data visible? And then the last one is one that we don't necessarily like to have to execute, but it's always important to think about as data recovery. So if we do come into a scenario where we've lost some data within our design process, what does it look like? What kind of a stoppage is that for us to go in and recover that data? So we're going to try and tackle all of these, and there's really kind of 4 main areas that we're going to look at first. So we're going to focus on PDM. Some of you may not have PDM, some of you guys may have PDM, but I basically want to either introduce you to some of the PDM capabilities, or if you've got PDM, I want to kind of get the gears turning on where you can take it next. So some additional things that you can implement, and then I even have something outside of PDM that I'll show at the end and kind of discuss as well. So the 4 big things we're going to focus on is data visibility. So, is the data that we need to see visible and accessible to everybody? We're going to look at search capabilities. So what are some of the different techniques I can use to be able to find the data that I'm looking for and make that search process as efficient as possible? We'll look at workflow integration. So how to add the different steps in your design process into PDM and account for them. So things like approval processes, change processes, all of the different steps that we need to account for in our organization. And then this kind of ties it all together is automation. So with these other things that we're doing, are there repeatable actions that we're doing all the time that we can maybe automate? So instead of a manual task that relies on everybody to kind of execute the same, is there a way that we can just go in and automate that and basically have the software carry it out for us to the standard that we require? So first thing is data visibility. So we're really focusing here on making all the information accessible, but trying to do it in as clean a way as possible. So what I want to do here is jump over to PDM, and I want to talk about some of the different ways that we can basically make data visible and some of the best practices that you should consider when trying to do so. So inside of my PDM vault, I've got a couple just sample files here, and really what we're going to talk about first is data cards. So within PDM, whenever you're looking at a file, you have the ability to see a data card that displays information about that file. And all of the categories on this data card are customizable. So this is an example of a really simple one where all I've got is just part number, description, weight, and revision. And then I've got some additional tabs for things like approvals and comments. So simple isn't always bad. It's not always about adding as much information as possible. It's about adding effective information. It's about adding usable information that is always filled out and that always needs to be there. Occasionally we'll see data cards. I don't see it as much in PDM, but I see it in a lot of other systems that people move from, where they've created some sort of a card that just has every imaginable piece of information that they could possibly want. And while it does allow you to record a lot of data, it can also make things a little cluttered. You're looking at a data card with 100 different categories and only 10 of them are filled out, but the rest of them, may have some sort of default value in them, or you're just confused about where the information should go. So the big tip I've got for you here is on these data cards, you want to think about the information that's really relevant to the type of file that it applies to. And you want to try and just make sure that the information is only necessary. So within PDM, a data card can be applied to different file extensions. So a SOLIDWORKS assembly may have a slightly different data card than, say, a Word document. And so this is a really good way to separate out that information. While you could make one card that applied to every file type in your vault, it's a lot more effective to create multiple data cards that apply individually to specific file extensions. And that way we can capture just the information we need about the type of file that we're viewing. Along with that, you can also take and you can actually make it so that data cards are specific to the folder structure they're in. So let's think about a scenario where we've got a prototype versus a production folder structure. Well, in the prototype folder structure, I may want to have a different data card than I do in the actual production folder structure. And that's because the information about files in prototyping are probably a lot different than the information about the files once they're actually being produced and manufactured. So again, just kind of reiterate, data cards can be assigned by file extension and by folder location. That gives you a lot of flexibility. So I would encourage you guys, think about this if you don't have PDM, but if you do have PDM, reevaluate what you're currently putting on your data cards. Go and look at some sample file sets, see what you're currently filling out, what's being left blank, and think about some stuff that maybe you wanted in the past but hasn't been added yet. Because data cards can be kind of as simple as you see here, where I've only got a few categories. Or if we take a look at maybe another vault that I've got here, you can see that the same file can have additional categories kind of as needed. Same things for parts, right? So you can get a lot more complex, but complex isn't always better. Necessary or effective data is always going to be the best path for you guys to kind of pursue. So along with data cards, other areas where we can really make data visible and we can customize what data people are able to see would be with our column sets. So in PDM, we have our default columns up here in File Explorer. So things like checked out by, size, file type, state, when it was last modified, all those kind of standard action items. But you can add additional column sets. So if there's something you would like to be able to see, maybe without having to go look for it on a data card or on a bill of materials or somewhere else, you can add additional column types, and those column types can actually be assigned to PDM users or groups. So you could maybe say for the manufacturing group that they're going to have a column for revision, and you can display it there. And then you can maybe assign a different column set to another group within PDM. But basically, think about what information would be helpful when you're going and you're browsing through the vault, and you can add that information to these column sets to just make that process a little bit more efficient, right? So it's great that we're recording data, but it's also important that we're putting the data in the right location so that it's visible where it's most effective. Along those same lines would be a bill of materials, right? So on assemblies in SOLIDWORKS, if I go and look at a bill of materials, it's going to kind of build that whole bill of materials out for me based on the file structure. And these column sets can be customized, right? So at different levels in the organization, a bill of materials may need to look a little bit different. So you may have an engineering BOM, and there may be some column sets on there that the engineers want to see, but then purchasing might want to see something a little bit different. In this particular bill of materials, I've got a column here that shows the state, and purchasing may not care about the state. Right? If they're going to export this bill of materials using the export options in PDM, and they want to export it to like an Excel file, maybe they don't want to export it with the state column in there. So what they're normally doing is they're exporting it and they're having to manually delete that column. Take the time to just set them up a column set where the state is not visible. Assign that column set to your purchasing department, and you're going to save them just a little bit of time. I know that it probably doesn't seem like a really large amount of time savings, but I like to equate this to kind of a video game analogy. If you've ever played video games, in any of the recent years, most of the video games allow you to go see your amount of time played. So this is a great way to see how much of your life you've wasted. You can basically go see the cumulative time you've played, and even though you're playing the game maybe 20, 30 minutes at a time, after a year or so, you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, I've spent how many days playing this game? It's the same thing here. Thank goodness that we don't necessarily have the ability to see how much time we spent, deleting unnecessary columns or trying to switch over to a different view to see the data that we need, because it would all add up to a measurable amount of time that we could probably have utilized more effectively on other tasks. So when it comes to data visibility, just try and make sure that effective data is located where it can be used most. Clean up anything that you don't need, and then look at adding anything that is currently not there. All right. So now that we know how to kind of put into place some best practices for recording appropriate data in the right places, let's talk about searching for data. So sometimes, a big hurdle that we've got to come across is just finding the data that we want to view. And so my goal here is to kind of introduce you to the search capabilities in PDM if you haven't seen it before. And then if you have seen the search capabilities, we're going to talk about maybe some additional things that you can take advantage of, some ways that you can make that process a little bit more effective. So in PDM, we've got our search bar up here at the top, and this was added in kind of the recent versions of the software. So previously, we had to use the dedicated search. We'll actually look at that here in a minute. But we've got a search bar now that makes that just a little bit easier. So if you're searching for something simple like file name, description, some of your really common variables, you can basically set up this search bar to search for a couple of different variables. You can have like a standard set of defaults, and all you got to do is type up in that search bar and really quickly find the data that you're after. So for simple searches, make sure you're using that search bar. It's going to be a little bit quicker than going into the dedicated search tool. Just like we talked about before, not a huge amount of time savings for an individual search, but when you're talking about running 30, 40, 50 searches over the course of a week, or for some of you guys, way more, that time definitely adds up. So the dedicated search tool here, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this, and I'm going to show you guys the complete search. So the complete search is kind of a default search that exists in PDM out of the box, like a quick start scenario. A lot of you guys probably have the the complete search. And it's a really great tool because it allows you to search across a ton of data. But before we kind of dive into this, one thing that I want to mention is, just like with the data cards, sometimes less is more. So while this complete search does have a lot of functionality on here, there may be a lot of functionality that the standard SOLIDWORKS user doesn't necessarily need. So you may consider taking your complete search card, saving a copy of it, and then removing some of that information to really just give them the meat of what they need inside of that search card. And that'll just make it a little bit easier for them to navigate without having to wonder what each and every one of these categories does. So when you're searching in PDM, the great thing about PDM is it searches quick. So even if we're searching for something like file name, it's so much more effective than Windows Explorer. And really the reasoning for that is because Windows Explorer kind of relies on Windows indexing. And even if I know the name of a file in Windows Explorer, knowing the name of the file doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to find it fast. If you try to search the top level of a folder structure for a file name, it can be a while, especially for companies that have accumulated a large amount of data. Well, with PDM, what we do is we take all that information and we strip it out and put it in a SQL database. And SQL is just completely optimized for searching through data extremely fast. So if I want to search on like a partial file name, I just type in that partial file name, hit search, and then it's going to go ahead and just return those search results almost instantaneously. This is a pretty lightweight vault, but even with a vault that has a lot of data, you're talking about, 10, 20, 30 seconds, for a really large search across the whole vault. So you're able to find this data really fast, and you can search on partial searches really effectively. Okay, so file name is something that we can search for, and we can find those files extremely fast. Now, a lot of times when it comes to part numbering schemes, if you're basically naming your files with part numbers, well, then knowing the file name sometimes isn't necessarily intuitive. It's just a bunch of digits and serial numbers, and unless you're just really familiar with that part numbering structure, it can be a little bit tough to know what file you're looking for. So a lot of times it's better to search by descriptors or different variables that just tell us more information about that file. So a good example here would be description. So if I know that I've got some files in here with the word spreader in the description, I can basically type that in and it will find me any file where on the data card we recorded the word spreader. So all of that information that we're basically recording in these data cards circles back around, and we can leverage it later to be able to search across that data and filter down to relevant information. And so this kind of goes back to putting necessary information on your cards so that you can use it later and you can search for it really, really effectively. So searching for name and description, those are great ways to go in and search for data. We can actually search for data a lot of other ways, one of which is by actually using our card as a search template. So on the cards tab of the complete search, if I expand this a little bit, what you get is up at the top, you get a specific card. So I can actually search through all the cards in my particular vault. And then I can fill out kind of this template card and use it as search criteria. So kind of like we did before, if I go in here and type something into the card and then hit search, it basically uses whatever I've filled out here to go and search for data within my vault. And so I like this one because it's kind of the same method that you use to enter your data is actually the same kind of visual interface that you're going to use to search for your data. So I've just got a drop down here of every card within my vault. I just find the card that I'm trying to search for, and then I fill it out based on my criteria, and it's going to go ahead and find me those results. So you guys may have kind of used some of these in the past. There's a couple of other pieces of search criteria that aren't necessarily used as much that I want to just make sure you guys are aware of. One of which would be the ability to search for files that are checked out by certain users. So let's imagine the scenario where somebody's going on vacation. You know, Marcus is going to go on vacation tomorrow, and man, it sure would be nice if we could just kind of make sure that anything he was working on gets reassigned, gets checked in, and it's available for anybody else to work on. Well, you can basically go and use this drop down to basically search for anything that is currently checked out by a user. So if I wanted to go and search for anything that Roland's currently got checked out, I just select his user from a drop down, and it shows me anything that he's currently got checked out to him. So like I said, if he's going on vacation, cool, we'll make sure that we get everything checked in. Maybe we're going to do a big PDM upgrade or a data migration. We want to make sure that everything's checked in. This is another great way to do it. Or, you know, in the unfortunate scenario that somebody's sick, hopefully it's not COVID, you know, we can go and basically say, all right, Roland's going to be out today. You know, what was he working on? Let's make sure that we kind of take that into account if he's not going to be able to work from home, and we can go ahead and reassign it to somebody else. And then the last one that I want to show you guys real quick is workflows. So we can search for basically files in specific workflow states. And we haven't really gotten into the nuts and bolts of workflows. That's kind of what we're going to look at here in a minute. But I want to show you an example of where this can be effective is searching for data in specific states of the design process. So a big example for me is things that are pending approval. So basically, I want to make sure that all of our files are being approved in a timely manner. You know, approvals are kind of a bottleneck in the system. If I had to pick where I want files at, I either want them in, you know, my work in progress where engineers are actually actively making changes to those files, or I want them in manufacturing where they're cutting metal and they're making parts and we're shipping them out the door. I really don't want them to just kind of linger in this approval state where we're having to bug the same guy over and over, you know, to maybe get that approval done. And so this is a really good way to just go and make sure that we're able to view that information. So I can basically select my waiting for approval state, and then I can hit search to see if anything's currently there. And right now I've got nothing, which is great. Everything's probably in work in progress, which is what we want. And so that's just a nice way for me to go and view that information. And so a good scenario where you can see this being effective is imagine where you've notified somebody that they need to approve something. You know, I maybe see Marcus at the coffee machine early in the morning. I say, hey, Marcus, you know, I just finished up on that project you wanted. You mind reviewing it? And, you know, Marcus, it's early. He's thinking about cutting down trees because, you know, he's a lumberjack and that's what he does in his spare time. And he just kind of acknowledges it, but maybe something else comes up. You know, Marcus is a busy guy, something else comes up, and he just kind of forgot about that conversation altogether. And it's a really easy scenario to imagine, I think, for a lot of us. You know, you're made aware of something and you kind of forget about it. But if Marcus is like our main approver, you know, he can kind of just use this search and, you know, periodically, whether it's in the morning or the afternoon or daily or weekly, he can just pull up the search. We can just go search for anything pending approval, and that's kind of his to-do list. You know, here's everything that's currently pending approval. I can filter out this data, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to basically view, you know, all those files that need my attention, and I'm either going to send them on for manufacturing or take them back to the engineer for additional work. So make sure that you're taking advantage of all of the different search criteria. And if you're building these more complex searches where maybe you're trying to search across file name and description and workflow state and who's got it checked out, you know, and you're adding all of this stuff up and you're performing these searches regularly, a great way to make that process more efficient is search favorites. So you actually have the ability to add a specific search that you've configured to a search favorite, and then you can assign it or give other users access to that search favorite. So if I'm an engineering manager and I'm always going in here and searching for files checked out by my team and in a specific state, cool. Let me just go ahead and set up a search favorite real quick. And now the next time I have to run that, I don't have to go in and enter in all the information. I just select my favorite, hit search, and boom, we're off to the races. So little time savings here and there, it all adds up in the end when we do this over and over. All right, so for searches, make sure you're taking advantage of some of the advanced search capabilities. If you haven't been using the complete search, explore some of the different categories there, and then potentially simplify it down to some of the categories that your users will need. But be sure to use that because it makes it a lot more effective to find data. If you're creating advanced searches and you're searching across multiple variables and categories, go ahead and create some favorites and just make sure you can kind of reuse that search over and over. And then a last one here is about reusing data. So maybe I'm searching for an old legacy project that we did because it's really close to this new project that I want to work on. Well, take advantage of a tool called CopyTree in PDM. CopyTree is a lot like Pack and Go. So if you've ever used Pack and Go within SOLIDWORKS to basically grab an assembly and all of its reference files, Pack and Go does the same thing in PDM, but it has some extra knowledge and extra functionality about PDM and the way it operates. So we can basically take and we can copy and move a project to another directory in PDM. And when we do that, we can rename files using some of our serial numbers or naming conventions that we built up in SOLIDWORks, SOLIDWORks PDM rather. So there's a lot of cool stuff that CopyTree can do. And searching for old legacy files and then using CopyTree to reuse that data is going to be a really effective process for you guys. All right, so let's get to the big one here, and that's going to be workflow integration. So, with today's design process, there's just a lot of steps, a lot of stages, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of people that need to be involved within getting a project out the door from start to finish. So, if you've never seen workflows before, I'm going to show you guys kind of an example of what workflows look like, and then we're going to show you about maybe adding in approval processes, ways to improve communication, and kind of like we did with the data cards, some best practices. So if you've already got some workflows, what are some ways that you can maybe clean them up, or what should you be looking to do to optimize those workflows? All right, so to show you an example, this is the PDM admin tool. So this is kind of the back end of PDM if you've never seen it before, and basically you can create these kind of visual workflows. It's kind of like a flow chart, and you can have multiple workflows with PDM Professional. PDM Standard only allows you to have one workflow, so for the purpose of kind of illustrating all the possibilities, we're going to talk about PDM Pro. But basically, each one of these boxes here is a workflow state. So think about this as being like a major step in your design process. This particular one starts out with CAD files in a work in progress state where engineers can basically modify those files. And then once they're done, they're able to move them to this approval state where they're reviewed by an engineering manager who either gives us a thumbs up or thumbs down. And from there, they would move to this approved state where they're kind of released for manufacturing and made visible to other users within the organization. So you can actually build this workflow out to your specification to meet your company's exact processes. But there's kind of a couple things that you want to know. One, let's talk about the capabilities of what workflow states can actually do, because they're not just something that gives us a visibility about where we're at in the design process, but we can actually enforce certain procedures. So workflow states have the ability to control file access permission. So what we mean by that is basically allowing users to see files at a certain state, allow them to modify files at a certain state, or any number of other permission-related items that we can assign to users and groups at specific states. So the big example here will be at work in progress when engineers are actively working on designing models. We need them to be able to see those files, and they need to be able to modify them. So we basically give them the ability to read file content and to check out files. But I probably don't want my manufacturing department to be able to see those yet. I don't want guys cutting expensive material on machines that cost a lot to run if the files aren't necessarily ready. So I can give the engineers full access to a file at this state, but I can actually make that file invisible or not even available to my manufacturing department until it gets to a certain place in my design process. So we'll give engineers full control here. We'll submit that file for approval. And then once the file is approved, now I'm going to make that file visible using state permissions. to my manufacturing department, and the guys on the shop floor can suddenly see that released and approved file. And I'm also going to remove the ability for the engineers to modify that file, because I don't want them just making, wild changes, in the middle of production without us actually documenting and going through the appropriate process. So states do have the ability to control permissions. They don't just look pretty and have a name. So you'll notice we have a kind of a bottom half here as well to this workflow state, and this is actually my revision process. So once the file is approved, if we did need to make changes, we would actually require that users take that file from the approved process, kick it out into a new revision change state where they can make those changes, they can get it approved again, and then they'll send it back to the approved state for manufacturing. And when that happens, we can actually automate the revision process, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So you've got all of your workflow states, and those are going to be those boxes that you see here. And then between those, these are transitions. So all the arrows just kind of tell us a little bit about how a file gets from one state to another. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight on just kind of the workings of a workflow state. And what you guys would want to do is try and account for the different processes or steps that your files typically have to go through during your process. So everybody has a workflow, whether it's something that you really enforce and is very formal within your organization, or it's just kind of understood. Everybody's got some sort of a process. At the most simple level, it might just be me kind of leaning back in my chair and yelling at the guy down the hall, "Hey, I just finished up this file. Can you look at it for me?" Very informal, but I kind of lean back in my chair and yell at him every time I need him to look at something. Or maybe you do have kind of a set procedure in place, a more formal way that you guys send out an email, you send a file over to somebody, whatever it may be, where you're basically documenting these processes. So I would like for you to try and document these, but a good rule of thumb when you're trying to expand and create your workflow process is to start simple. A lot like with the data cards, sometimes less is more, because it's a lot easier to scale up a workflow than it is to scale back a workflow. So, you don't want to necessarily start off with a workflow that's got 100 different states. It's a little bit sticky and hard to understand for everybody, but maybe 2 or 3 states is a little too simple. So start with your core pieces of functionality, and an approval process is a great place to start. Go ahead and incorporate that, and then start to expand with additional states and transitions to account for other scenarios. And only do that when you feel like adding an additional state or transition is going to make that process easier and more efficient, right? Sometimes it's nice to be able to record it, but if it makes it, a little bit more complex and it makes that process slower, it's not always a great idea. So in an approval process, the idea here is that we're basically putting files in a state where we can search for them like you saw before, and where certain users are able to go in and review and approve those files. And the way that we kind of control what users are able to perform this approval process is kind of twofold. It can be either controlled through state permissions, where we say only certain users are able to view these files, but the more likely scenario is that we do it through transition permissions. So each one of these transitions, like submit for approval or approved, has permissions that can be assigned. So if I click on that transition, you'll see that I have users and groups here, and I can basically select one of these groups, and then I can give them permission to execute this transition. So essentially what I'm saying here is I give this user or this group permission to approve this file. And this is a very simple scenario where we're only requiring one user to sign off, but PDM can also account for multiple user sign-offs through transition types like parallel. So that would require a certain number of users to basically sign off before the file is actually released for manufacturing. So a lot of flexibility to account for the way that you currently require approvals to be done within your organization. All right. So assigning those permissions is a great way. Another way that we can make that approval process more effective is with notifications. So notifying somebody, on an action that they need to take is a great way to streamline the process. Having to pick up a phone or manually type out an email, again, doesn't take a lot of time, but if we could just make that really fast and really automatic, that would be a great way to do it. So you'll notice on this transition, I've got a little bell symbol right there. That actually tells me as a visual indicator that there's a notification on this workflow state. And I'll actually show you kind of what this looks like in PDM here in a second to actually send a file through a transition and execute a notification. So on a transition, you have a notification tab where you can actually set up notification settings to notify different users or departments about a file that has passed through this transition. So if I'm an engineering manager and I approve a file, when I do that, I'll have the ability to notify, say, my manufacturing team or certain users in manufacturing that a file has been approved and is basically ready for them to go ahead and start working with on the shop floor. Now, that's a really great scenario, but a big thing that I want to caution you guys about, something that, I've just kind of seen over time and is something that we've found to be really ineffective, is just excessive notifications. Think about a scenario where you've got somebody who just sends you emails all the time, and those emails really don't require you to take action. The email doesn't relate to you. It's not something you're going to deal with. Well, eventually you just start ignoring those emails. And PDM notifications are no different. If I'm getting notified every time a file is, approved for manufacturing, but it doesn't affect me at all, maybe I don't even deal with any of our manufacturing file sets, I do something totally unrelated, then I'm just going to start ignoring them. And so it kind of becomes a scenario of like the boy who cried wolf, where you're sending out these notifications and everybody's getting copied on them, and eventually nobody pays attention to them anymore. And so you've kind of turned a technology that could be really effective into something that has no effectivity at all. So when you decide to implement notifications into PDM, make sure that the notifications are very deliberate and that you're only notifying people when they're required to take action. You'll find that that's a much more effective method than just putting notifications everywhere for the sake of notifying. All right, so let's kind of see what this looks like over in PDM on kind of the front end. So back in my vault, what we're going to take a look at here is we're going to take a look at a file. I just want to show you what the process looks like for actually transitioning a file and maybe sending a notification. So what I've got here is I've got this assembly, it's just a handle assembly, and I want to go ahead and take this from work in progress, which you can see here in the state column, and I'm going to go ahead and submit it for approval. So as an engineer, once I'm done, I would go ahead and right click on this file, and I would hit change state, and it'll show me any available transitions here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit submit for approval. When I do that, it's going to give me the ability to submit that assembly for approval, and it'll also let me send any other related files. So these are all the other files that make up this assembly, and if I need to, I can actually submit those for approval as well. When I submit this for approval, I have the ability to add a comment, and adding comments is kind of something that typically I encourage people to use on the honor system. It's one of those things where if you always require it, then you'll just have people sitting here putting periods into their comment section just for the sake of being able to, kind of execute the transition. So I always prefer to start out with really loose permissions on PDM and just trust users. And if we start to have an issue where people aren't necessarily following the guidelines, then we can start to add requirements for that later on. But adding comments is a great way to kind of record and timestamp information. So if I was going to submit this, I could go ahead and add a comment in here, something along the lines of, you better check this. I have no idea what I'm doing. Right? So when somebody goes to review that file, they can always look back and see the comment that I added when I actually submitted it for approval. Now you'll see the state changed here. It went to waiting for approval. And at this point, if I was an engineering manager, I would have my own log into PDM. But for the sake of just kind of showing it really easily to you guys, I'm going to go ahead and just do this all with the same user. So I'll put on my engineering manager hat. And I would go in here, review this file. Maybe I use the 3D preview here in PDM, so I don't even have to open it up or look at a PDF. Say, all right, it looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to change state. And I can either approve it or say, editing is required, send this back to the user. I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And when I do, I've basically got the ability to go in here and add another comment. and also add a notification comment. And you'll see I can add a notification comment, and I can also select a user to notify. So Nadia is part of our mechanical engineering team. I'm going to just say, Nadia, please start on this ASAP. Right? And then I can just check her name, only notify her, and I'm not going to have to, unnecessarily notify Jeremy, who's our double E, and we want him nowhere near any of our mechanical parts. So I'm only going to notify Nadia. I'll change state. It's going to go ahead and submit that for approval, and then she could basically receive an email at this point that would just tell her that this particular file has been approved, and it would have my comment in there that's visible, so she knows exactly what she needs to work on. Okay. So taking advantage of those notifications and that workflow process is a great way to enforce workflow procedures, standardize that process, and make sure that we're kind of following along the necessary steps to get our products out the door. The last thing I want to mention about workflows is that workflows can be specific to certain files or certain folder structures. You can actually have multiple workflows within a vault. And so just really quickly, I want to show you on the back end where I've got multiple workflows here. And I've got a CAD workflow here that allows me to control my revision process, but I've also got one for things like office documents, right, where I can basically take and send those to different departments depending on what they are. I've got one for technical publications. So you can actually create different workflow processes where each one is nice and simple and applies only to the files that are going to go in that workflow. And again, that helps clean things up. You're not having just 100 workflow states in one workflow where you're not sure, where the next state is that your file should go. You can separate them all out, keep each one nice and simple, and just have multiples of each workflow. All right, so workflow integration. First place to start would be to include your approval process. From there, just look at other processes within your organization that are really necessary, that you guys have to go through a lot, and that you feel would be more effective by having a visible state in PDM for, and then also being able to control permissions on the state, so who can actually modify, view, or work with those files at a particular state, or who can actually move files from one state to another. So all of those are kind of good justifiable reasons for adding additional steps in your workflows. And keep in mind that you can manage more than just CAD. So PDM's a great tool for SOLIDWORKS files, but it's a great tool for a lot of other files as well. You can manage different workflow processes for Excel files, Word documents, basically any file type that you would like to store in PDM. And then lastly, don't forget, don't overcomplicate things. Start off simple, work your way up, make sure that everything is really effective as is before you go and add additional states. It's a lot easier to scale up than it is to scale back down with workflows. All right, let's look at kind of my favorite thing. So automation for me is always a really cool thing because it basically allows you to do more with, basically the current manpower that you've got. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at transitions. So transitions can actually allow us to carry out certain tasks. And then we're also going to look at templates. These are two areas where you can actually save yourself a lot of time and you can ensure consistency within PDM. So we're going to take a look at both of those. So the first thing we'll take a look at is transitions. So back in my engineering workflow, we're going to take a look at that approved transition. And on a transition, you actually have an actions tab that allows you to add actions that will be executed when a workflow transition, or basically a file transitions through a workflow. So an approval transition is a really good example because a lot happens here. We're basically taking this thing from engineering where we're making changes all the time to now we've kind of set it in stone and this thing's going out the door and it's going to our customers. So you can add actions here with the Add Action button, and a lot of the different actions that you can add would be something like setting a variable value. So when a file is approved, I may want to record who approved that file when it basically went from the approval state to the approved state. So what you can do here is you can add an action And I'm just going to go in here and kind of edit this existing one. And you can basically say, all right, I want to add an action, and what it's going to do is it's going to set a variable value, and you can fill out the other information to record who approved it. And essentially what we're doing is over in our PDM vault, on our data card, we're basically recording on the approvals tab who it was approved by. So when we say set variable, what we really mean is we're setting the value of a variable for a data card on a specific file. So when I went through a couple minutes ago and I transitioned this handle assembly to the approved state, it actually recorded that the admin, which is who I'm logged in as, approved that file, and it actually timestamps it. So that's something that everybody does, right? Everybody's trying to record who approved it. You want to stamp it on a drawing, you want to record it somewhere. So PDM has the ability to automatically record who approved it, and it can put it on a data card, and then it can actually take that information and it can put it directly onto the drawing automatically. So a variable in PDM, or basically a data card category, has the ability to be mapped to a custom property in SOLIDWORKS. So I can take this approver and I can map it into a custom property in a SOLIDWORKS drawing called approved by, and then you can actually link a note in your title block to that custom property. So as long as your note is set up to basically pull information from the custom property, PDM can kind of finish that off by just pushing the data from the data card into the custom property. And so what you wind up with is complete automation of stamping your drawings. So now when a file is approved, I'm going to record the approver's name, I'm going to record the approver's date, I'm going to probably go ahead and automatically revision that file, and all three of those are going to be pushed into the data card automatically, and then all the way into the custom property, and then down into the title block, meaning I don't even have to open the file to basically update the title block on my drawing. So that set variable action, the ability to record data in the data card, for me is huge. I think that's something that everybody needs to take advantage of, because it's a great way to just automate and ensure that all of your approvals are getting written everywhere that they're supposed to be. Along with being able to set variables, we can also go and automatically increment revisions. So if you've got a rev scheme, whether it's just an alpha or a numeric, or maybe you've got something a little more complicated like a major minor, alpha numeric rev scheme, you can actually automate that in PDM. So when a file transitions from one state to another, the appropriate revision value is automatically incremented, and it gets recorded, and it gets pushed all the way down into the title block. That is also an action on a transition. And then another big one would be the ability to execute a task. So a lot of companies, when we approve a file, we want to go ahead and create a PDF. We've got a lot of people that still rely on PDF drawings on the shop floor to go in and create their file sets. So if that's something that you're still doing, then you can actually have PDM automatically create a PDF. So what you can do is you can kind of set up a license to SOLIDWORKS on your server, and whenever you approve a file, PDM just opens up SOLIDWORKS on the server. It automatically opens up the drawing. Everything's already been updated on the title block with all my approvals and revisions. So what it does, it just goes ahead and it just saves out a copy of the PDF. And then it can even take and put that PDF in some special directory that's maybe only visible to manufacturing. So tasks in PDM allow us to automate the creation of different documents. So whether it's PDFs, DWGs, step files, if I want to have it print off a file automatically, those tasks can be created and they can be automated on a transition. So transitions for me are kind of the first way that we should really look at automating different processes within PDM. Now, my favorite way is actually probably with templates though. Templates to me offer a ton of functionality when we're talking about trying to automate things within PDM. So let's kind of talk about a few things first. So we talked about transitions just giving us kind of an extra set of hands, automating some real simple things, throughout our design process. But where templates come into play is they help us get things started. So a template is a great way to basically kick off something new. So maybe I want to kick off a new project. I want to start a new file. I want to create a new ECO document. Things that you're doing over and over, and maybe require a certain series of steps to be taken in order to start every time. PDM templates can really do a lot to help us out there. So I've got a couple examples of templates that I want to show you guys. So back in my vault here, basically a template is something that you set up in PDM and then you execute through a right click in your PDM vault. So if I right click and I go to new, all of these items that you see up here at the top, these are all templates that I have set up. So I've got a template that helps me create a new project in PDM. I've got one that creates an ECO. I've got another one that creates another ECO, but it's in an Excel format. I've got one that creates a folder structure, one that just creates a new part. And I've even got one that allows me to create a statement of work. So if I'm working with you guys for some on-site services, instead of having to fill out a Word document manually that describes all the different things that I'm going to do while I'm on site, I actually have a template in PDM that allows me to automatically create this Word document with most of the information already recorded. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose to create a new project. So I'm going to right click and hit new project. And what PDM does is it just kind of presents me with a little prompt. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to just enter in maybe some customer information. So this particular project is one that's going to be for SOLIDWORKS. And I want to go ahead and select the project manager. Nadia, she handles a lot of our tech support and things like that. And so maybe if we're working on SOLIDWORKS with a project, I want to assign her with a project. And I'll just go ahead and make her the project manager. And then we even have the option to choose project location. So I just want to record, you know, if this is going to be stateside or if it's something that we're doing international, I can record that info as well. Now, when I hit OK, it may not look like a whole lot happened at first. I created a project. What's actually going on? Well, projects are actually pretty darn intelligent. And so what it's done here is it's actually created a new project, but it's already put it in my projects folder. So it doesn't matter where I execute this project, I can standardize it. So the new guy that we hired last week isn't putting projects in my ECO folder. He's putting them in the project folder. So what it did is it created a new project folder and it used the last 2 digits of the year followed by a serialized project number. And inside that project folder, it actually created a folder structure. So every project we create, we want to have a CAD files folder. We want to have an emails folder where we can record any correspondence with customers. Got a miscellaneous folder just so we keep things neat and organized, and we've got a place to put all the junk. And I've got a specifications folder for all my spec documents. It's also gone ahead and it's created an Excel file for my project that allows me to just kind of document any information I want about that project. But it's awesome that it's gone ahead and it's actually standardized the creation of this structure. So all the naming conventions, the project number, the structure, everything is standardized according to spec, and that's going to make sure that our vault stays nice and organized. Now, once I've created a project, you know, maybe there's some other things I want to do. Maybe I want to go ahead and I want to create a new file, like a SOLIDWORKS part file. So I'll go ahead and run another template. I'll say, all right, right click new, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new part. And it's going to go ahead and allow me to assign a little bit of information. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a description. Let's call this a test part for webinar. And then I can also go ahead and I can choose maybe what project this is going to apply to. So I haven't recorded all my project information, but let's say I want to go ahead and assign this to a different project, maybe project 17. Well, I can go ahead and assign it to that project. And what it will actually do is because I chose the project that I want to assign that file to, it will actually go and put that in the appropriate CAD files folder. Okay, so some logic or intelligence in there where I can basically tell PDM what project this new file I'm creating is related to, and it can actually go and put it in the correct folder. So I don't have to worry about navigating through the vault just to find the correct folder to put a file in. I can rely on a template to go ahead and put it there for me. Another great option for a template would be something like an engineering change process. So a lot of companies have like an Excel file, or a lot of our PDM customers have an XML file where they're going to go ahead and basically document their change process. So I can go in here and say, I want to create a new ECO, and I get an ECO template, all right? So it's automatically assigned an ECO number based on a serial number. It's recorded that I created it because I'm logged in as the admin. And I can go in here and record information like description. I can say which project this is affecting. I can say if it's going to affect items that we have in inventory, things that are currently in work in progress. what we're going to do with it. Are we going to scrap the existing part? Are we going to modify it? You know, we can record and customize these templates so that we're basically standardizing processes according to our organization. And so once I go ahead and create that ECO document, you guys can probably already guess, I'm just going to go ahead and drop that in my ECO folder. If I go in my ECO folder, sure enough, right? There's my new EO document that I created. If I look at the data card, it's gone ahead and it's recording all this different information, saying what project's being affected. Again, it's just saving me all these steps where if I created this from scratch, you know, I would have to worry about placing this folder in the right spot and maybe grabbing the right, you know, project number and all sorts of different things that go along with trying to get things lined up. But templates for me are just an incredible way to save a bunch of time and standardize kicking off new parts, new projects, new documents, all that good stuff. So try to keep templates in mind. You know, they're one of those things that's a little bit advanced and, you know, maybe they're not included in your existing PDM implementation, but there's something that you should be considering just because of the amount of time that they can save and the amount of automation and consistency that they can introduce to your PDM environment. Okay. So those were kind of the 4 main topics, but I've got a couple of quick things that I just want to mention, and then I'll kind of circle back around to questions because I know we're almost at the top of the hour. So one additional way that goes a little bit above and beyond, and we won't get into the details right now, will be data connectivity. So PDM can actually share information with other systems through the import or export of XML data. So if you've got another system out there that you're trying to feed data from PDM into, or maybe we're trying to pull information from one of your other systems, we can basically do that by importing or exporting XML. We can even do SQL queries for certain things to basically pull information out of other systems. So this would be a great way to leverage existing data so that you're not having to input and record that data in 2 different locations, record it in one place, and then just leverage it somewhere else. So if that's something you're interested in, we can always kind of have a one-on-one conversation to focus on what your needs are there. And then lastly, I can't get away from automation without mentioning something like DRIVEWORKS. So this isn't PDM related at all, but when you talk about automating and kind of taking the next step, outside of automating in PDM, DRIVEWORKS is basically an automation tool. So it gives you the ability to configure, price, and quote complex designs. So if you've got a product that is very similar, but each customer kind of wants it customized a little bit for them, rather than have to manually modify all of those CAD files each time just for a specific customer, DRIVEWORKS allows you to build out like a little interface where you just kind of type some different things into a form, and then you hit, you know, the magic green button, and it basically generates all of the CAD files, drawings, documents, quotes, according to what you've asked for. Some of you guys are thinking that sounds like magic, and it kind of is. I'm still not sure how they figured all this out, but it works incredibly well. It's a great way to just quickly take, you know, the configuration of an existing file from, you know, potentially days down to just minutes. And so that's something that you guys can consider as well, and it does have direct integration with PDM. So the next steps that you guys should really be looking at is how can I take advantage of any of these items? So I would encourage you first, just brainstorm with your team. You know, everybody encounters different hurdles in their day-to-day work. Get together, sit down in a room, draw it up on a whiteboard, and just think about places where things feel like they slow down a little bit. You know, man, we're moving really quick, and then we get here and just everything comes to a screeching halt. How can we get to the next step a little bit quicker? You know, what things are a little bit slow in our process that can go a little bit faster? The next thing I would do is try to find repeatable actions that can be automated. You know, look at your PDM workflow and say, every time we move from this state to this state, here's what needs to happen. All right. And once you've identified those things, can they be automated, or how can they be automated? Can we use transitions? Can we use, you know, maybe something like DRIVEWORKS or some other automation tools to get this automation done through that transition to basically keep us from having to manually execute that task? So try to identify those repeatable actions that can be automated, whether they're in the middle of your design process or at the beginning, where you can utilize something like templates. Check out our YouTube channel. Marcus spends a lot of time managing our YouTube channel, and our engineering team creates a lot of really cool videos. We've got some neat things on there. Chris Sauter made a really nice one about creating an ECO process that uses an XML document. So you might go check out our YouTube channel and just check out some of those tips and tricks. You can also check out mysolidworks.com. Customers on subscription service have a lot of access to free content on that website as well. And then from there, I would encourage you guys to take some training with one of our PDM experts. Myself, Chris Souter, Nadia, Roland, we all teach PDM admin training from time to time. And we kind of spend a couple days basically showing you guys a lot of these advanced techniques that maybe you just have kind of forgot about since PDM was implemented, or you're looking to learn something new that you've never been exposed to. It's a really great way to learn a ton in just a couple days. And then lastly, if you don't have PDM yet, it's kind of time to bring some efficiency in your organization. So it's a really good opportunity to look at how to bring PDM in, how to implement it, what your options are. PDM standards included with a lot of the SOLIDWORKS licenses out there, so you may already own it. Or if you've got PDM standard, maybe we need to look at bringing up PDM Pro to take advantage of some of the additional functionality we looked at today.